For us to be able to see an object in the world, light has to travel from that object to our eyes. There are two ways this can happen. Either the object has to be an emitter, like the sun that creates its own light, or light has to travel from some other source, reflect off of the object, and then hit our eyes. This second example is the one we're going to talk about today, reflected light. When I try to visualize an object, it helps me to think in terms of three types of reflections: diffuse reflections, specular reflections, and Fresnel reflections. We'll take a look at each one of them in turn. The first kind of reflection is a diffuse reflection, which is shown on this brown object here. Diffuse objects are the ones that we would consider non-shiny. Think of something made out of rubber or plaster. If you look at it at a very small scale, you'd see that the surface was rough and that it scattered light in all directions. So a diffuse reflection generally does not show a lot of the color of the surrounding environment. You see a lot more of the local color of the object, in this case, brown. The second type of reflection would be specular reflections. The best example of this would be chrome. It's completely shiny. It very clearly reflects everything around it, from colors to the details of objects, but you get very little indication of what the local color of the object itself is. Most objects fall somewhere on the spectrum between completely diffuse and completely specular. So theoretically, we could combine the two effects to create a semi-gloss object, like you see here. This is getting us close, but we still need to take into account the third kind of reflection, the Fresnel reflections. If you stand on the edge of a still lake and look straight down, you'll see that the surface of the water is not very reflective. You can see quite clearly down into the water all the way to the bottom of the lake. But the more you raise your gaze and look out across the surface of the lake, the more reflective its surface becomes. You see less of what's below the water and more of what's above it. This is a good example of the Fresnel effect in action, and it applies not just to liquids, it also applies to solid objects. Basically, it means that the shallower the angle that you're viewing the surface of an object, the more reflective it appears to be. So now let's go back and apply the Fresnel effect to our simple object. You can see that now the portions of the object that are most directly facing us, like the side of the nose of this simple airplane shape, are more brown. We're seeing more of its local color, whereas the parts that we have a more grazing view of, like the tops of the wings, reflect more of the world beyond. So now let's take a look at how I've used these effects in a couple of my paintings. In this painting of a '57 Chevy, if you look at the front of the hood, the part that's vertical and facing mostly toward us, you can mostly see the color of the paint itself, the red. That's the local color of the object. But if you look at the top of the hood, where our angle of view is much more shallow, you can see that it's more reflective and shows you more of the world beyond. In this painting of two B-32 bombers, the aircraft themselves are unpainted bare metal, so they're already very reflective, and I'm really heightening that effect on the edges. If you look at where the aircraft curves away from us and meets with the background, you can see that it almost disappears into it entirely. This is a great way to make an object look like part of the environment it's in and not just cut out and pasted on. As you look at the world around you, you'll be amazed at the examples you can find of these three different types of reflections, and you can really take your paintings to the next level by understanding them and incorporating them. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if so, please like and subscribe.